coming to your seated posture, sitting in a chair, arms by your side, or on the ground, crossed legs, half lotus or full lotus, as you take that deep breath in through the belly, engaging the diaphragm, filling up the lungs, retaining the breath, and slowly exhale as you contract the ribs and let out the last bit of breath as you pull that belly button in towards the spine. Starting all over again, deep breath in through the belly, retain the breath, and slowly exhale, allowing each breath to get heavier and heavier as you sink into your meditation. Continuing to focus on that space in between the eyebrows as we continue with part 5 of Malcolm Gladwell's David and Goliath, as he digs deeper into what is essentially neurological malfunction and career success. He says that in the Big Pond chapter, he talked about the fact that being on the outside in a less elite and less privileged environment can give you more freedom to pursue your own ideas and academic interest. Dyslexics are forced to stand apart from everyone else at school because they can't do the thing that school requires them to do. Is it possible for that outsidedness to give them some kind of advantage? In doing so, it's worth thinking about the kind of personality that comprises innovators and entrepreneurs. This is done by using the Big 5 inventory. The first is neuroticism, sensitive, nervous versus secure and confident. The second is extroversion, energetic, gregarious versus solitary and reserved. The third is openness, inventive and curious versus consistent and cautious. The fourth is conscientiousness, orderly and industrious versus easygoing and careless. The fifth is agreeableness, cooperative and empathetic versus self-interested and antagonistic. The psychologist Jordan Peterson argues that innovative and revolutionaries tend to have a very particular mix of these traits, particularly the last three: openness, conscientiousness, and agreeableness, which has two sides, cooperative and empathetic, or self-interested and antagonistic. For these individuals, the last is disagreeableness. These are people willing to take social risks to do things others might disapprove of. That is not easy. Society frowns on disagreeableness. As the playwright George Burnett Shaw once put it, the reasonable man adapts himself to the world. The unreasonable one persists in trying to adapt the world to himself. Therefore, all progress depends on the unreasonable man. Next chapter, Acquired Courage. Malcolm Gladwell discusses the most famous photo in the history of the American Civil Rights Movement. It was taken on May 3rd, 1963, by Bill Hudson, a photographer for the Associated Press. He was in Birmingham, Alabama, when Martin Luther King Jr.'s activists had taken on the city's racist public safety commissioner, Eugene Bull Connor. The photo was of a teenage boy being attacked by a police dog. Even to this day, it has not lost its power to shock. All the papers ran the photo, and in the White House, President Kennedy was appalled. A year later, the Civil Rights Act was signed, but it is often said the act was written in Birmingham. Martin Luther King came to Birmingham in 1963 with low turnout. He was outgunned and overmatched. He was the overwhelming underdog. He had, however, an advantage of the same paradoxical variety as David Boise's dyslexia. He was from a community that had always been the underdog. By the time the Civil Rights Crusade came to Birmingham, African Americans had spent several hundred years learning how to cope with being outgunned and overmatched. Along the way, they had learned a few things about battling giants. King was the prophet. Wyatt Walker stayed in the shadows. They were under no illusion that they could fight racism the conventional way. They could not defeat Will Connor in the polls, or in the streets, or in the court of law. King told Wyatt, "You've got to find the means to create a crisis. A way to have Bill Connor tip his hand." And the crisis created by Walker was the photograph of the teenage boy being attacked by a police dog. The plan devised by Walker was called Project C for confrontation. It had 3 acts, with each larger than the one before. Act 3 was a series of mass marches to back up the boycott and fill up the jails. Because once Connor ran out of cells, he could no longer make the civil rights problem go away simply by arresting the protesters. He would have to deal with them directly. And Walker wanted to tip Connor's hands, thereby revealing his ugly side. Walker's campaign was waning. Many blacks were worried, justifiably, that if they were seen with King, they would be fired by their white bosses. The local conservative black paper called Project C wasteful and worthless. The breakthrough came on Palm Sunday. They were supposed to march at 2:30, but they didn't start till around 4 o'clock. To his surprise, the next day, Walker looked at the paper that said 1,100 demonstrators had marched. The reporters got it all wrong. So they dragged out their meetings until the afternoon, when folks were coming home from work. The folks would form out on the side, and it would look like 1,000 folks. The comfortable white of Birmingham could only see through white eyes, said Walker. They can't distinguish even between Negro demonstrators and Negro spectators. Walker said, all they know is Negroes. A month in, Walker and King stepped up the pressure. One of the Birmingham teams was working at the black schools, instructing the students on the principles of nonviolence resistance. On the last Monday in April, he dropped off leaflets at all the black high schools around the county. Come to the 16th Street Baptist Church at noon on Thursday. Don't ask permission. The FBI got wind of the plan and told Bull Connor, who advised that any child who skipped school would be expelled. It made no difference. The kids came in droves. Walker called it D-Day. The children sang, held signs, and dropped to the floor, and then went into the paddy wagon. And then another dozen would come, and another dozen, and another, until Connor's men got an inkling that the stakes had been raised again. By the end of the day, over 600 children were in jail. The next day, Friday, was double D-Day. This time, 1,500 children skipped school. At 1 o'clock, they began filing out the church and headed to the park, where firefighters and barricaded police awaited. Walker said it was so hot, but he wanted Connor to turn the hoses on. He said, let them bake in the sun until their tempers were like hair triggers. And the dogs, Connor had been itching to use the city's canine corps. The children kept coming. And Connor's jails were full. The firemen were hesitant, but instructed to open their hoses as the children flung back. Walker began deploying another wave of children to open another front. Connor had no more fire trucks. But Connor was determined they would not pass into White Birmingham, and said, "Bring the dogs," calling 8 canine units of German shepherds as they lunged at a boy as he leaned in, arms limp. On Saturday, every paper in the U.S. had the picture on its front page. Does Wyatt Walker's behavior make you uncomfortable? James Foreman was at Walker's side and saw him start jumping with joy when the canine unit was being deployed. "We got a movement. We got a movement. We have some policeman brutality." Foreman was stunned. They were seen as unthinking agitators who were using children as tools. Malcolm X said, "Real men don't put their children on the firing line." Fred Shuttleworth said it best, "We got to use what we got." A dyslexic, if she or he is to succeed, would be in the same position, of course. That is part of what it means to be disagreeable. What they did is not right, as it is not right to send children up against police dogs. But we need to remember that our definition of what right is, as often as not, is simply the way in which position of privilege close the door on those on the outside. That is how a small band of protesters armed with nothing but their wits have a chance against the likes of Bull Connor. On the next inhale, slowly start to wiggle your fingers, wiggle your toes, nod your head right to left. One more inhale, and gently open your eyes. Namaste.